Hi guys, if you guys don't know me, my name is Ainsley. I'll be graduating in May. I'm a dairy science and animal science double major, and in the fall I will be attending grad school to work on dairy calf work. So when Dr. Calloway said to choose something that we're passionate about and interested in, there was no doubt in my mind that I would be doing calves just because that's what I'm going to go into in the future. I've worked at the UGA teaching dairy in Athens since I was a freshman, since the fall of my freshman year. So coming up on 4 years there, absolutely love it. But I do have a lot of experience with the calves. I chose this topic because honestly, there's always an opportunity to gain a little bit more knowledge. And if this is going to help me in the future, I definitely want to know anything I can about it. I chose to do my project on improving feed efficiency in pre-weaned dairy calves. So those are going to be your hutch calves. And I'm going to do this by discussing feeding frequency, protein source that's in your milk replacer, and even the idea of mixing whole milk with either milk replacer powder or skim milk powder. For those of you who haven't worked on a dairy or maybe just don't know much about dairy calves in general, historically calves have been fed twice a day, and this is going to be due to the lactating herd being milked twice a day. When the calves are in the hutches, they get milk replacer that the primary component of protein in it is actually whey protein. That's going to be pretty much all of your milk replacers. There are a few other differences that I will note towards the end of this presentation. So at the UGA dairy, we feed our calves milk replacer at 5 a.m. and 3:30 p.m. But throughout the day, those calves are allowed access to starter grain and water. So they always have grain in their hutch if they do decide to eat the grain. But I also think that this is a pretty important topic just because the future of dairy is automated. It's coming faster than we even realize, but this can mean it means of robotic milkers or even automated feeders where they put the calves in group settings and they have like an automated feeder feeding them at certain times, feeding them specific amounts and making sure that they do get the adequate milk replacer that they need. This is also due to just the lack of young people that want to work in farming right now. But I think right now we have 2 farms in Georgia that do have robotic milkers, and it's coming really fast to Georgia. First thing I want to talk about is the idea of feeding twice a day versus 3 times a day. Like I said, at the UGA area, we do feed twice a day. If Donald Sockett actually spoke at the World Dairy Expo in 2014 about this, he claims that there's a lower bacteria load in the milk replacer when fed 3 times a day, just because they drink it faster. There is less milk replacer in the actual, there's less milk replacer content in each feeding. And in his study, he actually found that the feed efficiency rates, as you can see on the slide, the calves that were fed 3 times a day, their feed efficiency rate was 0.52 gain per dry matter intake, and the twice a day was 0.61. He also measured their body weights from the time they were born to 42 days. And you can see that the calves that were fed 3 times a day actually gained 10 more pounds than the calves that were fed twice a day, which this also means that they ate more starter grain at the time of weaning just because they needed, they were larger. It was more of a maintenance requirement for them. There are some farms that tinker with the idea of once a day feedings. In a study about this, they actually found that calves fed once a day had higher insulin than calves fed twice a day, which means that the calves fed twice a day have a higher acute insulin response. And in another study about this, they found that there was a high concentration of neutrophils when calves were swapped from feedings twice a day to feedings once a day. And that this can show that once a day feedings, changing to once a day feedings are an acute stressor for calves. As you can see on this chart, if you look at about day 27, there's a pretty big difference in the neutrophil content of their blood. And obviously we don't want anything to stress our calves out, especially with us being in the Southeast, being in Georgia. Our calves are already under heat stress. They're already under that stress from the variance in temperatures that we do have down here, which brings me on to Dr. Tao's study. If you guys know Dr. Shaw Tao, he is actually in the Animal and Dairy Science Department. He's currently in Athens, but he used to be in Tipton. He was speaking to me about this study a few months ago, and I thought it was fascinating. So of course I had to include it. His team actually added acetaminophen to milk replacer. So like your normal pain relievers. I was kind of shocked to hear that. And then he explained why. They actually took blood from the calves post-feeding. And from this, the plasma showed the acetaminophen content that was still present in their abomasum. So he did this study to judge the abomasal emptying rate. And his team found excuse me, found that calves fed twice a day gained the most weight during winter months. And they actually found that increasing the frequency of feedings increased the abomasal emptying rate. You can kind of see in these 4 charts here, he is a heat stress professor. So they did a summer study and a winter study, both with a twice a day and 3 times a day feeding. He also added that offering more milk replacer delayed abomasal emptying when calves are under heat stress. So that's going to be adding more solid content to the milk replacer. Like I mentioned before, the automated world is coming to dairy faster than we know it. So of course I had to include something in here about the automated feeders that are in group housing. So these were actually bull calves. There were 8 of them. 4 of them were fed 4 liters twice a day, and 4 of them were fed 2 liters twice a day. This was really just a study just to judge their behaviors based on the frequency of their feedings. And they found that feeding at a lower feeding frequency increased trips to the feeder, which that's showing a sign that they're hungry more often. But other than that, no other hunger related behavior differences were noticed, such as suckling on each other. When I was reading all these studies, of course, I thought that maybe 3 times a day, it actually is the most beneficial to the calves, just because of all the background information that I did get from the other research articles. But then I found this one, and this study actually measured pH values of the abomasum every single second. So it's very, very accurate data. And they did this using glass pH electrodes that were in the calves already. So one group, they fasted for 24 hours. One group, they fed twice a day, 3 times a day, 4 times a day, and 8 times a day. And they actually found that once you go past twice a day, the pH actually gets really high. So as you can see here, the 24-hour fasted calves had a pH of about 1.73. And then the twice a day calves had 3.44. And they also noted that the 3 times, 4 times, and 8 times were pretty similar. So there wasn't really much of a difference in the pH there, as you can see here. But they did note that a pH of this high could cause ulcerations in our calves. You can also see on the chart, each one of those spikes is going to be each time that they were fed. So on the one on the left, this is comparing the twice a day versus 3 times a day calves. And the one on the right is comparing the twice a day versus the 8 times a day calves. You can also see exactly what time they were fed. And like I said, this data is very accurate because the pH was taken every single second. I'm going to get into protein sources. Like I mentioned before, whey protein is going to be your primary component of pretty much all of your milk replacers, but there are some other combinations of other sources that are being tested, such as the one that was used in the study was actually whey protein, bovine plasma protein, and modified wheat protein. So in this study, they fed a solely whey protein milk replacer twice a day, and then fed the combination of the other 3 proteins 3 times a day. And as you can see on this chart, by week 8, which is weaning age for pre-weaned calves, you can see that the strictly whey protein milk replacer still had a higher average daily gain, even though they were getting fed twice instead of 3 times. This study was pretty cool because I hadn't heard of this before, but so this one talked about feeding a strictly whole milk feeding to calves, mixing whole milk with skim milk, and then mixing whole milk with milk replacer. Now I could see why a farmer would want to do this, because for those of you who haven't worked on a dairy farm, milk replacer is extremely expensive, especially when you're raising a lot of calves, or when you have a very small farm and you're not making too much money anyway, kind of like the UGA dairy. So I can see why some farmers want to do this because of cost effectiveness. So in this study, both the strictly whole milk and the whole milk plus the milk replacer had higher feed efficiency than the whole milk and the skim milk combined. And the skim milk feeding actually had higher diarrhea, which means that they needed more electrolytes, more antibiotics to fight all that, and which ended up costing the farmer more money in the long run. If I were to contribute to these studies, which I would love to in the future, because I do want to go into calf work, I would love to do a project on combining a high quality whey protein milk replacer with whole milk, maybe from the bulk tank, as long as you have lactating cows that are producing high enough fat to meet that 3.2% that is whole milk. I would like to maybe combine the whole milk and the whey protein, and then try feeding it twice a day versus 3 times a day, making sure that I am looking at pH, just because I don't want to cause ulcers in these calves. and maybe see if I can help the cost effectiveness for the farmer, because as most of us know, dairy farms don't make a whole lot of money, but they are very, very necessary for us as a society. So as long as we could use the milk from the bulk tank, we could probably cut that milk replacer cost down in half. And enjoy this picture of Sweet Lily. I thought you guys would enjoy that. Here are my works cited. And thank you guys for listening.